Is there anything in the Bible that you yourself have an issue with? Okay, so it took you reading the Bible to realize that those things were bad for you?
Yeah, it actually did. I
Couldn't
didn't
figure this out on your own?
No, Ted Bundy could be redeemed. God doesn't kill children.
What do you think the Passover was? Yahweh sets up a whole system in the Old Testament where you slaughter animals just so he's able to forgive you.
Today's special guest is novelist and Episcopal priest, Reverend Christopher Carlisle. Welcome to the show, Reverend. It's a mouthful.
Thank you, Michael. Wonderful to be here.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time. So a novelist and a priest. Tell us a little bit about the novelist first. Tell us a little bit about your books.
Well, so I spent, after being the Episcopal chaplain at the University of Massachusetts for 25 years, I decided I needed to get sprung from institutional walls. And so I went and worked on the street and created two communities for homeless, unhomed, minimally home people in nearby Northampton, Massachusetts, and Greenfield, Massachusetts. And out of that experience, I wrote my first novel, which I can show you right here, called For Theirs is the Kingdom, which is actually set not in Massachusetts, but in Montreal, fictitiously. But it's about a renegade street priest who bumps up against institutional powers and what it's like to fight battles when you're convicted that the institution is very often by its nature hypocritical to its mission. So that's what inspired the first one, For Theirs is the Kingdom, and then I just published this one called Pickett's Dream, and it's a very different setting. It actually takes place principally in Newport, Rhode Island. A working class priest in pursuit of a childhood love gets a job at the Episcopal Church in Newport and mysteriously and suddenly buys one of the mansions on Bellevue Avenue. And so that's how that story unravels. But essentially, both novels, what they both have in common is wrestling with the problem of greed and how it gets in the way of the sort of fullest relationships that I think most of us are in pursuit of.
Thank you for that. So as far as the greed, how do you feel about that? Why
Well,
the greed?
it's something that I know very well, too well.
I feel the story coming on. What you got?
Well, I think that, one of the pulls in the human condition generally and in our culture specifically is acquisitiveness of wanting beautiful things. And, in many cases, I think that's not a bad thing. But when it begins to sort of get in the way of the fullness of another person, when competition begins to take over instead of sort of mutuality relationship, then you begin to get, I think, a culture that is not unlike the one that we're living in right now.
Thank you for that. Very interesting. Lots there. As far as biblically, I know we're jumping right over to your second life here, your alter ego, your priesthood here. Do you follow the Bible as far as greed wise, what it says about greed or give to the poor type thing?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's one that I bring up a lot, particularly with people whose reading of the Bible focuses on issues that, should be wrestled with, but which Jesus doesn't seem to be as focused on
Hmm.
as Christians often think, things like gender and sexuality and so on, that obviously are issues to be wrestled with. But what's interesting in, for example, the Gospels is that, Jesus talks about greed, depending upon how you read the words and the phrases and interpret where he's
Hmm.
going, anywhere between 20 and 70 times in the Gospels. It comes up again and again and again as something that he feels gets in the way of the kingdom of God. And so that I think is striking, because you sort of ask yourself, why is it that people obsess about certain things and they completely ignore other things? And I think
Hmm.
the answer in
Hmm.
my case, and I think the answer in the case of generally American culture, is that we don't want to face it. We don't want to confront the fact that, we have these impulses that are less than what we like to be.
Sometimes less than beneficial, for sure, as far as the greed goes too. Um,
Mm.
so, would you say, I'm just throwing this out here, tell me if I'm wrong. So us being greedy, we could be greedy for recognition. Could that be something we're greedy for?
I think so. Yeah.
Praise, recognition, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
So as far as when we're greedy for that kind of thing, it's seen as a negative thing. But when we switch it over to God and he's greedy for praise and recognition, it's seen as a good thing. Can you help me understand why?
Yeah. So I guess here's what I would say about it. It's a great question. And I think that, for example, when we are sort of greedy for things out of our own ego, when we are acquisitive, or when we need a kind of praise that's very self-centered,
Hmm.
the paradoxical outcome is that we're more alone than we were before, because we're
Hmm.
trying to sort of get something that can't be gotten on our own. And it's only when we open up to the other in a spirit of generosity that suddenly the fulfillment that we're seeking by way of praise and so forth comes to fruition.
So does that essentially work for God then? It's the same way. It's just emptiness when he's searching for all that praise and recognition.
Well, so here, that's a pretty stunning question, and one that really goes to the heart of our conception of God, because um, one of the things that I think people are really afraid of is thinking about God as needing us. We
Hmm.
have a conception of
Hmm.
God as being all powerful, autonomous, authoritarian, and in need of nothing.
Hmm.
And I don't see that. If indeed we see the divinity of Jesus, I don't see that anywhere in Jesus. I see someone who is constantly reaching out
Hmm.
uh, in mutuality to find fullness in community rather than in solitude. So it really, in that way, sort of defies these abstract conceptions that we often have of the all-powerful God.
So break that down for me. So Jesus is different, so therefore God doesn't need, and if it doesn't feel empty for him when he needs praise and help me understand a little more. Help me understand.
Yeah. So could you ask that question again?
Well, I mean, if it's empty and fruitless for us when we do that, when we're greedy for praise and recognition, why is it not empty and fruitless and when God does it?
Well, I wouldn't attribute greed to God.
He's
guess
greedy for our praise, though, right? I mean, at this point, it's a competition between the devil and the world, and he wants your praise and your recognition. He wants your love so bad that, he's, I don't know, willing to kill himself or send people to hell that don't love him. I don't know how you, as far as you go that one, but
yeah.
it's definitely a greed. I see. I see that he's greedy for these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it greed.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I, I mean, I guess the question is, are you talking about the relationship that you understand God has with us, such that one of the characteristics of that is greed? Because I guess the thing I would say is that um, greed is essentially ego, and the
Right.
notion that on our own we can find fulfillment. And obviously, as a priest, I think a lot about that fulfillment coming by way of God. But the question is,
Hmm.
what does it look like in everyday life? And I would say that what it looks like, the incarnation of that divinity, is in mutuality, whereby, and Jesus talks about this all the time, the more we give of ourselves, the more we receive.
Hmm.
The emptier we are, the fuller we become. And these are notions, that aren't simply dependent upon being able, because many people cannot call Jesus God. It's not dependent upon that. I think we know those moments of self-giving and receiving all the time, regardless of how we sort of conceptualize it religiously, or in terms of our agnosticism,
Our
or
empathy.
even
We use
in
our
terms of
empathy to see that these things, these are empathetic towards these situations. Yes, 100%. But you mentioned greed is ego. That's the thing that I want to tackle. Um,
Mhm,
ego. What about God's ego? God also has a big ego. I mean, so
mhm,
we're going from greed to ego at this point. Is ego a good thing or a bad thing?
mhm. Good question. So if I can just bring it down to our human lives and then think about God in that context, um, I would say that, that let me talk about myself. I
Hmm.
think that when I pursue my fuller self by being egotistical, better than the next person, more successful, have more money, whatever it is. When I pursue that fuller self through my own ego, um, that's when, in the end, I end up truly empty, because I'm
Okay.
alone, and ultimately poor of friends, poor of spirit, and so forth.
Again, that's the same thing
Whereas
God
when I
does. He thinks he's better than everybody else, and he's very egotistical about it. You got to love him. He's the number one person. If you have another God before him, wrath.
Mhm.
That's very egotistical. I see that as very
Yeah.
egotistical, at least. And then he comes
So
down
are
and has to kill
you?
himself to himself and all these other things. It's very weird. And God's allowed to have the ego because I see lots of places in the Bible where it tells us egos are really bad. Pride comes before the fall, and all those
Mhm.
pride
Right.
goes before destruction. Sorry, doesn't go
Yeah.
unpunished.
So can I just ask, because so when you think about God as egotistical, what sort of passages, or where in the scriptures do you immediately sort of think? I mean, do you go to a
Well,
particular?
your God is a jealous God. There's
Mhm.
for number one. I mean, that's
Right.
he's already got himself set on such a high pedestal that he's going to punish children. He's so jealous at times. So there's one. I mean, you can't worship any other gods. There's another one there. Yahweh
Mm-hmm.
wants you to show the guy no pity who works on his special day. This is my
Mm-hmm.
Sabbath day. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
now show no pity to this guy that picked up sticks. Kill him. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's pretty egotistical. I'm so special. My special day. If you work on it, you will die.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things in here, not to mention half of the rules he throws
Mm-hmm.
out in the Old Testament there.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot
Right.
of this stuff is right about him. 10 Commandments right off the bat. The first three, it's about him. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really good. I mean, that's very important, I think. And um, I wrestle particularly with the Hebrew Scriptures, what we call the Old Testament,
Hmm.
um, and the legalism that seems to sort of jump out off the page, and sometimes the arbitrary. Some of those stories are pretty scary. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, uh, so and so anyway, what I would say though is that, and this is not to say it's not in the Hebrew Scriptures,
Hmm.
but I can tell you just as one who obviously for fairly obvious reasons probably reads the Gospels and Paul's letters a lot more than that enormous tome of the Hebrew Scriptures.
Hmm.
And it seems to me that Jesus uh, turns uh, turns sort of life upside down, and um, and also says some pretty radical things relative to Pharisaic law. I mean, they get into, those two, the
Yeah.
Pharisees and Jesus are at it all the time, and
Well,
uh,
I
and
mean, God did
so.
say those laws were perfect, holy, righteous, and good several times. So he really liked those laws. And
Mhm,
regardless of if he changed them or not, he thought they were good ideas and perfect
mhm.
even. But you did mention the difference, those words, between Yahweh and Jesus in the Old Testament and Yahweh stuff. We got Matthew 5:38, where God tells you, or Jesus tells you to turn the other cheek. But then you've got God in Deuteronomy 19:21, show no pity. Their life shall
That's
be
right.
life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, all that stuff. But Jesus says,
That's
no,
right.
no, no, don't do that. Turn the other cheek instead. So
Yeah.
are they the same guy with the same message, or did God change his mind somewhere along the line? Because this isn't really adding up for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a great, that's again, that is a really great question because those two passages that you're mentioning
Huh.
um, really run against the grain of one another, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and Jesus does that more than once. He says repeatedly, you have been taught such and such, but I tell you such and such. And
Right.
so one could, and I think that's the kind of wrestling that we all need to do, to really realize that the paradoxes between the Hebrew Scriptures and Jesus and the law and the
Love your
Sanhedrin
neighbor.
and all the there's a real that's the beginning of the journey,
It's a
and if
disconnect there, though. That's part of my issue. Well, a lot
Mhm.
is a lot, but this is part of the issue. And it just there's a big disconnect there between the two characters, but they're supposed to be the same character. And that's very confusing. But notice nothing changes. God's word is perfect and holy and righteous and good, but yet it changes when Jesus or he comes down. It's all very confusing. It's all,
Yeah.
just
Well, no,
yeah.
but I mean, I think you're right. I don't think we should pretend it's not. I
Hmm.
really think that's a big mistake. And
Uh,
because if we pretend that we can sort of synthesize everything and package it up, we're missing so much of the tension between Jesus and the law to which he,
which is
adheres
God
in
essentially.
his life.
The tension between Jesus and the rules he set before, because Jesus is God, right? I mean, I don't know how you feel about that. Before I go too further,
Yeah.
is Jesus God
Well,
or
so okay, so again, you ask a lot of very good questions, by the way.
thanks?
And here, but and that doesn't mean I therefore have all the answers, believe
No,
me.
I
So
didn't
but
expect you to have all the answers. Maybe some of them. I don't know about
well,
all of them
who
though.
knows? Maybe maybe that would be doing pretty well. But I would say this though, for example, I mean the question of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. That question, the notion of God as three in one and one in three and so on, is itself it's perfect paradox, perfect ambiguity. And how do you answer that? For example, when Jesus is on the cross
Mm-hmm.
and and we are seeing the divinity of Jesus, or Christians see that.
Hmm.
But then Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Right.
So, is this God, is God one or is God three? And
And which
I
God is
mean,
talking at this point?
what's that?
And which God is talking at this point?
Well, exactly. I
Is it the
mean,
Holy
and
Spirit in Jesus's body, or is it Jesus in the Jesus body? I don't know. It gets very confusing when you start to think
yeah,
about it
but
and really ask questions about it, you know.
yeah. So can I mean, can I just sort of, because this is a really good jumping off point for me, so the Greek mind, is the mind that makes up is abstraction. Plato is the perfect. Plato was the great sort of advocate of creating these ideas, or these notions, these abstractions that are true, regardless of where you look at them, how you look at them. So, for example, in the case of God,
Hmm.
God is God, and so it's the way we view that is that there's a detached reality called God. Now, um, in the
Detached
case
reality.
in the case though of um, well, let me see if I can. There are two words for in the scriptures for faith. There's pistis, which is Greek
Hmm.
for faith, and essentially what it means technically, it's Greek, is you believe in a doctrine. So faith means you have a bunch of ideas and you believe in them.
All right.
And then emuna, the Hebrew for faith, which comes from ema, which means mother,
Okay.
is the notion of faith as nurturing, as maternal, as being enfolded, as being related. It's a very different move from the Greeks.
Okay.
And to the extent that, I feel that God is absorbed in my pores, probably more than in my head. Um,
I don't know what that
then
means. That's
what's
that's
that?
quite a statement.
Well, so it's why I think you see a lot of Christian contemplatives who adopt a lot of Buddhist precepts. That
Like love your neighbor.
that it's relational, that it's really experiential as opposed to sort of idea oriented.
Hmm. Hmm. So this detached reality, that is God. Does God live in a detached reality, or the detached reality is God?
Well, I think the question is, um, how do you come how do you come to understand God? So the question is,
Is
what medium, sort of, the fancy word in the reason you go to seminary and pay a lot of money is that
it-
you get a lot of multisyllabic words, and one of
Yeah.
those is epistemology, which basically means how are you knowing anything? I'm sure you know, but
Yeah.
how do you know anything? Do you know? And the question I would ask is, do you know something by thinking like a Greek? Okay, I've got this entity, God, and it looks like this, and I believe in it. Or, on the other hand, do you believe in a God that enfolds you in a very experiential way, which is very much the way Buddhists,
Yeah.
come about enlightenment?
No, none of
So,
that. Um, yeah, I don't believe in any of that. I don't experience it. I don't see it. I start from zero. I don't. Yeah, I'm not going to pick one. And that's my thing is I'm not going to just, there's a lot of gods out there. There's a lot of ideas out there. There's a lot of stories out there. And
mhm,
yeah, no, I don't interact with God. I don't believe that there is a spiritual world to interact with. How certain am I? I go with levels of certainty. I don't know for sure that there is no God, but from what I've experienced, there isn't. From what
mhm,
I've seen, there isn't. There may be a creator deity out there. There may be a creator alien race out there somewhere. It might be even a plant that just flies by and creates life by flowering. We have no idea. We have
mhm.
no idea. And I'm not going to pick one. So until I have more certainty,
Right.
I'm not going to go, hey, this is Jesus. Or,
Yeah.
hey, God from Genesis is the one that spoke words and made
Yeah.
days without a sun and, cursed people, all that stuff. I'm not going to just fall into that. I have to have that experience. And the thing with the Christianity is a lot of people experience God. They experience this, what is it, the detached reality. Detached reality comes into their reality and interacts with them in some way. Again, but there's no certainty that that is Jesus or that is their particular God. So it's very confusing to me on how we can go from I had an experience to that was Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I'm at. Levels of certainty. I don't know
Yeah,
for
but
sure.
see, I mean, I saw, I think that piece that I told you I saw, where you were talking, you were being interviewed. The
Yeah.
podcaster was being interviewed, and you said something that resonated with me, which is that this is a journey.
Hmm.
And the kind of agnosticism I think you were pointing to, which is, I don't know, but the point is I don't know. So don't make me say that I know something that I don't know. That is that is the beginning of the journey. And it may, for
Hmm.
me, it may be the end of the journey too. Because the question, like, are you an atheist? No, only 40 or 50 times a day, you know?
Well,
Because
I
this
think you're an atheist against all the other gods except for one or three,
Well,
depending on
but
how
the
you see
thing is,
that.
there are those moments, and I guess getting back to our discussion about ego,
Yeah.
there are moments of enormous egotism when the only thing that exists in my life is myself. Now, I find that a kind of hell, to be honest, because
Hmm.
I feel alone and
Hmm.
empty. But the point is, in those
Hmm.
moments, the God that I espouse isn't there. But I always, I personally always come back to suddenly realizing, well, God's there in a different way or in a different moment.
Hmm.
And you obviously don't,
Yeah.
but I think where we would agree, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the journey of uncertainty is where we should be. We should not be
Hmm.
assuming that we're certain when we're not. And I'm speaking for myself here. I one of my mentors, uh, he just died, a 94-year-old Catholic priest, married,
Hmm.
still a Catholic priest, with a 38-year-old daughter, contemplative, a Buddhist, uh, but also, I mean, just an amazing amalgam of experiences that he orders in his life.
Hmm.
But the thing he said to me that had us talking about Einstein forever in the last 6 months of his life was he felt the greatest prophet of the 21st century was Albert Einstein. And I
Wow.
can go on about why I think that,
Yeah,
but
that's
why I agree with that. But but uh, and one, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
no.
Mike.
Finish your thought there. Go ahead and finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say that that Einstein said, um, anyone who says I'm an atheist doesn't understand my physics. And he went on to say, um, uh, uh, let's see, and he went
Hmm.
on to say um, uh, that his understanding of the larger dimensions, I'm not sure he would call, I don't think he would use the word God. He might, but I doubt it.
Maybe
Um,
not in the same way we
right,
usually. Yeah.
exactly. But he said, this is not philosophy, this is physics.
Hmm.
And then he goes on to talk about at the quantum level, all of these amazing sort of ways that he understands things like time and space are illusions. They're
Yeah.
human constructs. They're not real. They're not real in an objective sense.
Yeah.
Um, and that
That kind of stuff
opens
hurts
up
my brain,
a
though,
whole
Christopher,
journey.
honestly.
What's that?
I said that kind of stuff hurts my brain. That's way beyond my pay grade for sure.
Yeah.
But I want to get back to the certainty though. So I started from certain. I was certain. I was in the church. I had the God. God was there. He was, whether I felt him or not, or saw him or not, God was there. I was certain of
Hmm.
it. And then
Yeah.
through my journey, became uncertain. I
Yeah.
read the Bible. I put two and two together. I started using a little more logical reasoning. I
Yeah.
didn't pretend that God was there as much. And then he
Yeah.
started to fade away, just like a, invisible friend as a kid. And that's kind
Yeah.
of where he stood. And that's where he stays as a character in a
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. So, I mean, uh, so you would say your relationship to God is a non-relationship.
I'd say I'm open to have a relationship with him because I have lots and lots and lots and lots of questions. That would be great. Then I could talk to him. I mean, we don't have to be friends because, like kind of like a work relationship. You don't have to be the best friends. We just got to get through this together kind of thing.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
because I mean, if the Bible's true, the dude's a monster. I mean,
Hmm.
he's an egotistical, child killing, just monster. But that's a whole other topic there. So yeah, I mean, that'd be great, but he refuses to show up. He refuses to say hi or send me any signals that would like be any kind of recognition that it's him. I mean, I can't decipher between Spider-Man, the cat, and just normal life experiences at this point. God needs to step up his miracles a little bit in order to have that relationship he seems to want to have.
Yeah. So, okay. Um, I mean, would it help
Hmm.
for me to sort of describe how God comes into my life, or is that
Well,
not
is
helpful?
it okay? So would you say you have a personal relationship?
Well, what is that? So I think that gets back to this question of ego.
Hmm.
I resist that idea because
Okay.
I think we have developed, particularly in the last 100 years, in our narcissistic capitalist time, we have developed this notion that of God as personal property, as a
Hmm.
private relationship, and I don't see that in the Gospels. I don't see that
Hmm.
in communities that traveled Palestine before Jesus. Um, so, uh, so that personal notion, really, I think
Hmm.
needs to be, in my mind, replaced by the public God who embraces the whole of humanity and all of community, and not simply, by the way, institutional Christians or institutional Jews. Um,
Huh.
that's a narrow notion of God that defies the universality that we say that we attribute God, to God.
Interesting. Lots of questions there. Before we go into, well, in heaven, I just got it. In heaven, are you going to have that personal relationship with God? Do you believe?
Yeah, that's great. You know, so now that I'm 71,
Hmm.
I'm suddenly interested in a way that I wasn't when I was 51. In the notion of passing. And
Hmm.
I have a friend who wrote a book on death. He's a scientist. He's a true agnostic.
Hmm.
He wrote The God Particle with Leon Lederman, the physicist.
Hmm.
Anyway, he wrote a book on death, and he interviewed a funeral director that I happen to know as well. And he said the most honest answer he ever got to the question, what happens at
Hmm.
death, was from this funeral director who looked him in the eye and said, "I don't know." And he's probably buried, hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And, there's part of me that feels absolutely, uh, I don't know.
Hmm. Hmm.
And and yet there are times when I have intimations of transcendence that aren't simply about what's going to happen when I die, but when somebody loves someone else and I'm moved and I say, my God, that's bigger than just these two people interacting. There's
Hmm.
something much bigger that I need to identify
Hmm.
as divine. And I
Hmm.
and I think those, I think also the little moments are the big moments, and the big moments are the little moments. So the little
Sometimes, yeah.
moments of seemingly sort of insignificant interaction are often the ones I remember. And the
Hmm.
big things that were supposedly sort of going to change my life seem pretty insignificant.
Uh,
So that paradox operates
hmm.
a lot too, and it's one that I think resonates with Jesus's sort of teaching.
Interesting. How does that resonate with Jesus' teaching?
Well, his idea that the less you are, the more you become, the more you give away, the more you have. Go down to the bottom of the table, get out of the head table, so that at some point someone will say, "Come higher, friend." Those weird things that really run against the grain of capitalism. Jesus was fighting the Roman Empire in the way that I think a lot of
Hmm.
us are fighting or having problems with the United States now.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
real empire mentality. In Rome, power was power, wealth was wealth. There was no paradox. The more money you had, the more money you had. But then you have this wandering Jew saying, no, actually, the more you give away, the more you have. And unfortunately, in our century, the church has not been very good about that. The
Hmm.
church has not been vocal and articulate about the fact that if we're really going to be true to the fulfillment that we say we are, we better start giving stuff away, including ourselves.
Yeah. Jesus definitely wanted you to give stuff away.
Yeah.
It definitely said that one. So back to this public God. Thank you for that, by the way. Back to this public God. You mentioned he embraces everyone. Can you describe that a little more? How does that embrace work? Is it just a feeling, or does he actually interact and protect? Um, what does God do with this embrace?
Well, okay. Let me give you an example that comes from my experience on the street. So
Go.
I was a street priest for 10 years, and we with several other clergy and then the whole community, we created two communities in two different towns.
Hmm.
And and you know when after service, so here was the service. You know, uh, we would have a Eucharist,
Hmm.
but the Eucharist was a real meal. It wasn't, in the
No.
Episcopal Church, we have a little dry wafer, and then you
Uh-huh.
get a little bit of wine,
Yeah.
and that's the meal. Well,
Well, that's
that
just
was
weird
not the
anyways,
meal.
but yes.
That was not the meal in Jesus's time. Jesus loved eating and drinking and being on the street.
Hmm.
And so anyway, we our Eucharist would be a ritual with prayers and a reflection and a scriptural reading,
Hmm.
but we immediately then would go to the meal. And we used to say, you can do without the sermon, you can do without the ritual, you can even do without the prayers, but you cannot do without the meal. And
Well,
the
man
reason,
cannot live by bread alone, apparently.
well, so that's the thing, is that Jesus had a good idea about how well food worked to open people up and
Well, I
interact
think a
with
lot,
one
yeah,
another.
definitely a lot
And
of people by then. That's what they did. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah, I go with
and
that.
for us, for me, just apropos of those experiences of transcendence, when God really includes, I mean, we had guys who were living in stairwells in winter
Mm,
in New England, and who were really cast off and disregarded and couldn't get jobs and all the worst kinds of things. And was there destitution and depression and isolation and sadness? Absolutely, all over the place. But there was also some of the most profound insights into the transcendent. We don't have to call it God. For a lot of them, it is God, but for a lot of them, it was just the something more.
a
Came from the
hope.
people who were pushed to the margins.
So this embrace is a hope. So people are living in
Yeah,
stairwells and
yeah,
God's
and
embracing them
you
and
know
giving
what?
them a hope.
I think that's a good way of putting it. And by the way,
I don't think that's a good
it
way of
was
helping,
it
though.
was absolutely illogical.
Well,
I mean,
humans
they
have
had
hope
nothing.
for illogical reasons a lot of times, but that doesn't mean God. The embrace is it's so God is watching his children die of starvation, freeze to death, but he's embracing them with hope. That's just weird. And then people are
Well,
helping, but the people are helping. God's just sending an embrace of hope, and people are going, "Hey, we need to do more than that, God. These people need actual help." And then people step in. So I think God's embrace is kind of useless.
well, okay, but and you might say that, for example, what I did on the street for 10 years was useless. And that's fine, that's fine to
Did you
feel that
give
way.
hope
But
or did you actually help people out?
oh, I mean, we had meals and clothes
Right.
and
God doesn't send
and
meals. You did. God sends
well, but
hope.
but God in me sent those meals.
You did it. You think everybody that feeds hungry people has God doing it? Or is it
Well,
just
I
them
mean,
doing it out of the goodness of their heart or seeing a fellow human in need?
but I think that that's the divine.
That's the divine. What if these people don't believe in the divine?
Well, that's okay. That's totally fine.
God
And
still works
lots
through
of
them? Is that
them,
what you're saying?
I my job is
Well, hold
not.
on. Hold on,
Yeah,
Christopher.
sorry.
Does God work through them? If there's an
Yeah,
atheist
that's
feeding,
what I
so
believe.
God is working, so God is negating their free will and making them do something nice.
Oh no, I think it's always our choice to accept that motivation or not.
So God is
And
sending motivation
lots of
now.
people don't. Huh?
So God is just sending the motivation to feed hungry people.
No, I mean, my what I'm saying about I can really only speak for myself when I
Hmm.
say that um, my inkling, and that's often all it is, by the way, um, that there is a larger presence and possibility for my own fulfillment. And in that sense, by the way, uh, my faith is utterly selfish,
Does
utterly. You know,
does God
Jesus
work through
doesn't
animals too? Because I've seen animals do that as well.
do what?
Feed the hungry.
Yeah. I
Animals,
mean, I think that's
God
the
works through
divine.
animals.
That's the divine for me. That is the divine motivation that brings communities together. And you see it, by the way,
Huh.
at the cellular level. Uh, you see cells sacrificing to nurture other cells. It even happens at the
I don't
cellular
see God
level.
sacrificing anything to save his kids here with the food. He can feed the hungry with a few, loaves of bread and a few fish. Why doesn't he do that now? Why doesn't he multiply the food for the hungry, the starving children that died just now? You know, where was God? Why didn't he send a fish? It's weird.
Well, I mean, I think that that's what keeps me wanting to find those fish and reach out and
Well,
and
good.
uh, and
I'm
help
glad
people.
you're doing it because God seems to be just sitting on the sidelines, sending his kids to go do his work for him
Yeah,
when he can just, think it and it happens. I don't know. It just seems kind of weird for me.
but don't you think? Okay, but so does it make no sense to you? This is a really an honest question.
Yeah.
Uh, does it make no sense that for me, the incarnation of God and Jesus is also the dynamic in myself, that God becomes incarnated in those few acts of generosity amongst, by the way, lots of acts when I'm just utterly self-centered and selfish and don't like even facing the fact that I do that.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think because you like this character of Jesus and what he does, you want to emulate him. We emulate our heroes. That's what we do. We copycat. We're copycats, most of us. So, I mean, that's what I see as far as it's just Jesus character. You want to be like this Jesus character, not all of the Jesus character, because there's definitely some stuff in here about the Jesus character I'm sure we can find that you don't like. Um, but you've emulated the part you do like. And that's what I see out of it. And that's not a bad thing as long as we're sticking to the good parts here and not the stoning children to death for disobedience or sending people to hell
Yeah.
for not loving you. But that's the good parts of Jesus. Let's stick to that. I'm okay with that. But my problem is the bad parts of Jesus still exist. You've got the part where he wants to throw people like me into hell. I don't think that's very
Where what
loving.
where is that in the Gospels?
Oh man, you're making me look things up. That's okay. We got plenty of time here. Almost
Well,
there.
I'm
Yahweh will
not
give
only keeping
vengeance.
you honest, I'm keeping myself honest here.
Good. No, absolutely. I love it because it's happened before. I look it up and I'm like, wait, that verse is wrong. There it is. Jesus will throw me into hell. Matthew 13:41 through 42. The Son of Man will send out his angels. So that's the Son of Man is Jesus. He's going to send
Hmm.
out his angel army, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. I do evil, according to God. They will throw them into the fiery furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. 2 Thessalonians 1:7 through 9. This will happen when our Lord Jesus is revealed from heaven in the blazing fire with his powerful angels. He will punish those who do not know God, that's me, and do not obey the gospel of our Lord Jesus, also me. They will be punished with everlasting destruction. So,
Hmm.
two bad things there. I don't think that's good to throw me in
Hmm.
hell because I don't love your God or Jesus or his angels or just because I don't believe.
Hmm.
Also, not a good idea to throw somebody in hell. So,
Hmm.
the bad parts,
Hmm.
these.
So, uh, there's only, all right, who's this guy?
Well, this is Pepe Le Mew Mew. He is making
Oh,
his debut. Okay, we gotta go
you speak French?
now.
Um, so the interesting thing, Jesus says there's one unforgivable sin, and that's the sin against the Holy Spirit.
Another weird thing. I've
Okay,
done that.
except, mhm. Sorry,
I've done that. So, I mean, I'm destined. Jesus is going to come down and do that. Is that a good thing?
is Jesus is going to do what?
Throw me in hell. He's going to throw me in hell. I've sinned the unforgivable
Well,
sin.
okay, but what's interesting about that line is
Hmm.
if the unforgivable sin is the sin against the Holy Spirit,
Uh-huh.
that's essentially turning your back on everything that Jesus represents in terms of the energy of God, which is self-giving and self-sacrifice on behalf of someone else.
No, self-giving and self-sacrifice. Okay, okay, okay. Please tell me you're not referring to Jesus dying.
Well, that was part of, sure, it was part of
Oh,
the,
okay. How was that self-giving and a sacrifice? Help me understand that.
how is that self-sacrifice?
Right. Jesus is an eternal being. He lives forever. He dies for 3 days and he's back up in heaven doing his thing. How
Mhm.
is this a sacrifice?
That he that he was unwilling to submit to the Roman Empire and the enslavement of people. So he
But what was the
showed a different
sacrifice, though?
way.
He stood against Rome. Great, stand against the authority. I'm all for that. Fight the power. But
Mm.
what, what exactly? I forgot my question now at this point. But ah, do you remember what the question was?
I'm not sure.
Oh
We're
man,
on the
we're
journey
thrown in hell.
because of both.
Jesus, he did the Romans. Oh man, see now I'm going in circles. I've lost my train of thought. Cats, they're distracting. All right, well, Jesus is going to throw me into hell. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? The audience is screaming at me. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. So yes, Jesus throwing me in hell. Is that a good thing?
See, the thing is, I don't see the presence. I don't see the the hell teachings as being prominent at all in the Gospels. And obviously you do, and we come
Do you believe
at
it?
it
Well,
differently.
do you believe in hell then? That's an easy question. Do you believe in hell, yes or no? What happens to an atheist when they die? Let's go with that.
Oh, I think the atheist is fine.
Where do I go?
Well, I mean, I as I said, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I'm with the funeral director. I
Yeah.
don't know.
I love I don't
Um,
knows, Christopher. Those are my
but
favorite answers. But Jesus is
well,
saying he's going to throw them into a fiery furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That place, whether it's hell or not, doesn't sound awesome. So
yeah.
is he going to throw people into a fiery furnace where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth?
Well, so this also, by the way, gets to the question of how you read the scriptures, and biblical literalism.
Yes.
Um, and can I just say something about that, and then we could
Of course. Go
revisit
ahead. Yeah.
so because I think that unless you look at how you read the scriptures. You can't then interpret the fiery furnace and so on in a way that's true to how at least I read the scriptures. And one of the first of all, the notion of a literal, people ask me this all the time, sort of, do you believe in the literal veracity or the literal truth of the scriptures? And I don't know what that means in the sense that when I read anything 5 times during one day, I read it 5 different ways. And I would be disingenuous to say I can extract a static truth that's certain, and that is that. It's not the way I know how to read.
How do you read fiery furnace? How does that read to you?
Well, I think that's a metaphor for being devoured by greed, by selfishness, by a disregard for other people.
They'll throw them into selfishness. That doesn't really add up for me, Christopher.
No,
So
well,
Jesus is coming back with his angels, and they will
but you know
throw
what?
them into something.
Mhm.
This one says fiery furnace, but you're telling me it's selfishness and greed. That doesn't really, that's not
No, I
even
mean, I'm
remotely
saying fiery
close there.
furnace. Fiery furnace is a metaphor.
Right. But you're saying the fiery furnace is a metaphor for greed. I don't see
Well,
it.
I mean,
Help me
the
understand how that's
question
a
I
metaphor
would
for
ask
greed.
is, how do you read it?
I read it
Because
exactly
I
how it's
read
written.
one.
They will be thrown into a fiery furnace. I know what throwing is, I know what fire is, and I know what a furnace is. So I put all those together in my head, and that's what I think. I don't
So do
add
you?
words to it or take words away from it to
Mhm.
add it and make it sound different. These are the words that are written. That's what I mean, I don't know. I don't know how else to do this, Christopher. It's my common sense. It's my, this is reality to me. They will be thrown into a fiery furnace. I don't know how else to read that.
Mm-hmm. So you read it literally.
I typically read things literally. Yes. Literally
Mhm.
reading them out loud, and
Yeah.
what
So
they
I mean,
say
I
is what
think
they mean.
we read them differently.
Right. You're not reading it that way. So you read it as, I don't know. How do you read that verse? They will throw them
Well, I
into
mean,
a fiery furnace. How do you read that?
so here's the thing. I mean, I think what I
What
would
words
have
do
to
you
do,
put in
this
there?
is this is what I do with text is I have to sit with it for a long time and look at, sort of look at context and all the things that, again, for an expensive seminary teaches you how to do. But and then sit with another person, you or other people, and wrestle with the text.
How about
Um,
sent out his angels? The Son of Man will send out his angels. Do you have a problem with that part? The Son of Man will send out his angels. Do you think that will happen?
Well, I mean, I think that the angels have been sent out into my life many times.
So
People
now
who.
that part's true. Why do you believe that sentence versus the one that says they will be thrown into a fiery
Oh,
furnace?
I
It's
think
a
I
they're
think
very similar sentences. They read the same kind
yeah.
of structure here. I don't
Mhm.
see anything special that I need to read differently or add or
Mhm.
take away. It's not a
Mhm.
parable. We're not reading Jesus's confusing, stories here, trying to teach us a lesson through confusion. I don't
Mhm.
understand that one either. But I just see the words that were written for me, apparently, you know,
Mhm.
by God and his almighty wisdom.
Mhm.
And but these are confusing words. God is also not the author of confusion. Christopher, I'm very confused.
Well, but so as I said, first of all, if I'm given a text like that, I would really have to,
Sit
and
down
I
and
have,
yeah.
but would have to do that anew. But what I would say is that those words that are metaphors for me, that describe pretty unpleasant condition, right? I mean, it's
Oh,
nothing,
how about
nothing.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you remember that story?
Yeah, that's
Were
that's a
they in a
fiery
fiery
moment
furnace,
too,
or
right?
were they thrown into selfishness and greed?
Well, I mean, again, I that's a text to wrestle with, you know.
So you
Um,
don't think they were thrown into a furnace?
well, I'd have to, that also I would have to look at, the evolution of that text where it came from. I mean, it's there are many layers when you wrestle with scripture. And I don't think, by the way, the questions you're asking
Did Jesus die?
are really important questions. I mean, if you don't say, I don't get it, then you'll
Hmm.
never get it.
Well, yeah, even then, I still don't get it because nobody's explaining it
Because
to me.
otherwise it's not authentic. And
Hmm.
I think it's one of the things that I really like about what you do, by the way, is that you insist on an authentic experience, and you're not willing to sort of take it out of hand for at face value. And I think in the
Hmm.
church we do that far too often.
Hmm.
I really
Looking
do.
for an authentic experience. I like that. Absolutely. But what about, okay, so let's jump to another one real quick. We'll close that on this guy.
Yeah.
Um, non-believers are condemned. John 3:18, whoever does not believe in Yahweh and his son stands condemned already. What do you believe that means as far as the condemned there? Because he says it again in Mark 16:16.
hmm
So
So
condemned
ask the
there.
question. Sorry, ask the question one more
What
time.
is the condemned in those verses telling us?
Well,
Whoever does not believe is condemned. What does that mean
yeah.
to you?
Well, for me, it means that your relationship, the fulfilling relationship that you could have with God is not possible um, without believing in certain things. Now, those certain things I think by their very nature are inclusive. They're not exclusive. The problem with those passages is if they're read in a certain way, it looks like, for example, the passage of the sheep and the goats.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that you have those who are saved and those who aren't. But the
Bah, I'm a goat. No,
yeah,
definitely a goat
but
in those
but
things. But as far as the
but
condemned here, so you're saying the condemned are just because they're not going to have that relationship? That's what condemned means in this situation?
Yeah. And for
Weird.
me,
Weird.
getting back to your question of what hell is, for me, hell is being alone and being impoverished,
Hmm.
isolated from those people who could give me joy and
See,
love
isolation sounds great
and
to
a
me.
sense of
We're
meaning.
total polar opposites on that. Give me some isolation. Give me a cabin in the woods and I'll be good. No,
That's
no.
what I,
See, it's
that's
just
what
a little
I've
bit
got,
different.
by the way. So
Awesome. So condemned in these situations are that. So again, you mentioned the relationship though. I wouldn't be able to have a relationship with God. I don't have a relationship with God now, and I'm fine. I don't feel condemned. I
mhm.
mean, I guess condemned to silence from him is where I'm at, if you want to throw that on there. But uh, yeah, how do you take that though? It seems different to me. I'm reading it different. Seems
Mhm.
they stand condemned already.
Mhm.
Whoever does not believe in Yahweh. Does God want me to believe in him?
I think so let me give you there's a story about Niels Bohr, the physicist. I don't know if you and Bohr was it was Niels Bohr, and I can't remember who the other physicist. There were three very famous physicists at Bohr's place in Norway, or one of those Finnish places. And anyway, and they met, I guess, every year. Anyway, so they were having their little reunion, and uh, and uh, one of the physicists approached Niels Bohr's cabin in the woods,
Mhm.
and he saw a horseshoe nailed above the lintel of his doorway. And he said, Niels, surely you don't believe in that. And Bohr said, well, what does that matter? It works whether I believe in it or not. And the point being
Hmm.
that uh, that for me, I'm truly not telling you what your experience should be, because
Hmm.
that would be disingenuous. But for me, the reason that I can feel okay about being an atheist 50 times a day is that the presence of God in my experience is there whether I believe he's there or not.
That's I feel like you're just pretending at that point. We're just pretending he's there, whether he's there or not.
Hmm.
Um, But back to the question though, does God want to have a relationship with me?
I think, given what we know about Jesus's sort of reach into the margins of the world and into the centers of power and everywhere, yeah, I think you're a
Weird.
guy that he would really enjoy. By the way,
Well, he better come
I,
down and start saying something. Let's have that talk.
well,
Man, no.
maybe
See, I mean,
maybe he
if God
sent
wants
me
that
here to tell
relation,
you that.
what's that?
Maybe he sent me down to tell you that.
No, Christopher. I get that a lot. I get that a lot. Jesus sent me to say something that's not convincing to you.
No, but
Thanks,
I'm not,
Jesus.
but understand, Michael, you know, that notion of sort of coercing people and proselytizing defies
Hmm.
the freedom within which we can choose or not to choose or
God will
not.
circumcise your hearts. I mean, that's, I don't know, man. That just sounds pretty bad as it is. God says that, by the way. He's going to circumcise your hearts. You know, every knee shall bow, too. That's a good one. Yeah, no, thank you. No, thank you. It's so much for that free will. But anyways, Christopher, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can we find you at?
So my website is christophercarlisle.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And then, you know, then there's Picket Stream, my little ad, Picket Stream, and For Theirs is the Kingdom are my two books. And if anybody feels so inspired to read them, I would love to talk about those stories with them. So, but I can't thank you enough, Michael. This has been a lot of fun for me. It really has.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Stay safe out there and we'll keep in touch.
All right. Very good. See you.
That's all the show there is for you today. Thanks for listening. As always, you can find all things BSW related on the show's website at thebiblesayswhat.com. If you like what you heard and want to help keep the recording light on, simply go to thebiblesayswhat.com and sign up to be a supporter of the show. Your episodic tithes of $1 or more will get you early access to each new episode on Wednesdays instead of Sundays. And no matter which platform you use to listen to your podcasts, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on the next episode. Until then, would you kindly share and review the show?